Today, we're going to create a simple progress bar in Unreal and Unity. Let's go. Okay, so we're in the middle of a series of videos on creating procedural shapes and patterns. Throughout the series, we've been building a library of subgraph nodes or material functions that we can connect together to create all sorts of effects. If you haven't been following along, I've linked the playlist for the whole series down in the description. And if you're just looking for how to make a specific subgraph node, there's a list of them down in the description, along with a link to where I show how to make each one of them. All right, so this is the progress bar that we're going to make today. It's pretty simple, but let's go ahead and start from scratch and I'll show you step by step how to set it up. So today we're going to start out in Unity, and then in just a few minutes we'll switch over to Unreal and I'll show you how to make the same thing in that engine as well. So first I'm going to right click here and pick Create Shader Graph Subgraph, and we'll just call this Gradient Bar, and I'll open up my subgraph and we can jump right in. So we need two parameters to begin with. So I'm going to open up my blackboard. The first parameter that we're going to create is called progress, and this is what's going to control how much progress the loading bar has. And then the second one that we're going to create is a vector2, and we're going to call this one width height. And this is the parameter that we can use to pass in the width and height of the UI element that this is being applied to, so that we can compensate for the aspect ratio of the UI element. As we build things today, we're just going to be looking at the square preview window, but a lot of times you're going to be applying these UI elements to something that's like a long and thin shape, and in that case you're going to want to pass a different value into the width and height. Let's go ahead and set up some defaults for these values. For progress, I'm just going to set the default to 0.75. That's a value that we're going to be changing obviously as we test out our progress bar. And then for width and height, I'm going to just set the values to 1 and 1 for now. Okay, to create a progress bar, let's start out with a rectangle SDF node. And this is a node that we've created previously that just generates a rectangle shape. And instead of a rectangle, what we actually want is a pill shape. And so as we've discussed previously in the series, we can make a pill shape by setting the corner radii value here. This is a value that controls the roundness of each of the corners of our rectangle. If we set the size value here so that our height is the same as the roundness, it'll create a pill shape. So let's go ahead and create a vector2 value, and this controls our width and our height. So we'll hook that up to the size of our rectangle, and we're going to set our width to 0.9, and we're going to set our height to 0.8. And now you can see we've got a nice large rectangle shape here, and our curves are at 0.2. But what we want to do is split out the height value there, so the second channel, and we're going to use that as our corner radius, and that's going to give us a pill shape, because now our corner radius is the same as our height value, and so it's going to create a pill shape for us. All right, so that's going to be the basis of our progress bar. The next thing that we need to do is move this shape in the UV space so that it's creating progress. So we're going to input something to our UVs here so that we can move our shape. So let's go ahead and create a move node, and this is a node that we've created previously. You can find a link down in the description to how to create this, and we'll just connect this UV raw value here up to the inputs for our UV coordinates. So now we can move our shape around by controlling what's coming into this move value. And we're going to go ahead and create a vector2 so that we can move it up and down and left and right. Now in our case, this is a left to right progress bar, and we don't need to move it up and down, so we're just going to ignore the Y, but we do want to move it on the X. So temporarily, I'm going to create a slider here, and we can plug that into our X value. And now, as I move the slider, you can see down here in the lower right corner, our shape moves off the screen. And this is what we want, except we want the progress, we want it to start out blank like this at 0 and then move in. But I think we want it to move in from the left and go to the right. So right now we're starting out full and we're moving from the left to the right. But we actually want it to start out empty and move in from the left to the right. So let's adjust our input value here just a little bit. The first thing that we want is to remap this value. And the reason that we're remapping it is because our progress bar is going to have a border, and we want it to start right at the edge of that border. Instead of starting off the screen like it's doing right now, we want it to start at the edge of the border. So we're going to pass our value in. This is our progress value. And currently the value is from 0 to 1, but we want to remap it so that it's 0.1 to 1 to give us that tenth of space for the border of the progress bar. All right, now we're going to use a 1 minus node, which is going to invert the value. And then we're going to negate the value. And this will allow, right now it's coming in, it's starting full and going off to the left. And these nodes will allow it to start out empty and come in from the left. And so I'm going to go ahead and connect these up. And now you can see when my slider value here is 0, we can just see just a little bit of a sliver. And the reason that we see this sliver here is because of what I did with the remap node here at 0.1. This allows that to stay just outside the border that we're going to create for the progress bar. And now as I slide my slider, you can see it's coming in from the left and filling up the progress bar. Obviously, the progress bar doesn't exist yet, but this represents the mask that we can use to fill up that progress bar. All right, we're making some great progress. The next thing that we need to do is create some color for our progress bar. And we're going to use Shader Graph's gradient node. So the gradient node is pretty cool. I can just create a gradient here. Actually, I'm going to use a sample gradient node. And if I click on this little white square here, it gives me a nice interface. And I can click and add points and then customize these colors. And I can make my gradient do whatever I want. Now, I've already figured out a nice gradient that I want to use. And so I'm going to go ahead and pick this gradient here. If you'd like, you can pause the video and zoom in and sample these colors to get your gradient just the way mine is, or you can make your gradient look like whatever you want. But this is the one that I'm using. All right, so right now our gradient value here is just 0. And you can see if I add a slider, I'm able to cycle through this gradient. But what I actually want to do is use UV coordinates for the gradient. And so I'm going to add a linear gradient here, and this is going to be my mask. So let's plug this into our gradient. Oh yeah, that looks nice. However, I want our gradient, and this is actually reversed. I want our gradient to start out black over here and then get lighter as it goes. So this linear gradient node that we created previously, I can just click this invert button, and now you can see I've got my gradient going from left to right, from dark to bright. And now the other thing that I want to do is just like I used this remap node down here to give us some space for the border of the gradient, I want to do something similar with my gradient here. So I'm going to add a scale node, and this is also a node that we created previously in the series. And now I can connect up the U coordinate to my scale. And instead of 0.5, 0.5, I'm going to scale this to 0.89. And then we'll plug that in, and that's just going to shrink the gradient down just a little bit and give us some room here on the edge for it to start inside the border of our progress bar. All right, let's go ahead and minimize all of these nodes and just kind of shrink things down. And now we're going to connect up our color gradient here with the mask that we've created. So in order to do that, what I want to do is create a lerp node, and we're going to lerp between a value of 0.2, just a grayscale value, and our color that we've created with our gradient here, based on this as our mask. So if I plug in our fill shape here, now, let's see, I need to shrink things down a little bit to make some more room for some additional nodes that we're going to create. Okay, so now as I slide my slider here, you can see my color is staying in place because my UV coordinates here are static. So these colors stay in place, but my mask slides across the colors and comes in from the left here and fills it in. It starts out black and then goes to purple and pink and orange and yellow. And you can see I've got this really nice progress happening here as we slide our slider. So this is going to be the inside of the progress bar. And it's going to fill in just like that to create the space inside the progress bar that's filling up. Okay, the next thing that we need to do is create the actual outside of the progress bar itself. And in order to do that, we need to create another rectangle. So I'm just going to select our vector 2 here, our split and our rectangle node, and copy them. And I'm going to paste them up here to the top. And I don't want our UV coordinates that we've created already, because we want this to be the version of the shape that is static in place. Okay, and so now we need to set up some values here for our width and our height. I think for the width, I'm just going to set this to 0.91. And then for the height, I'm going to leave it at 0.8. We'll see what we get. We might need to adjust these just a little bit. So now what I want to do is grab the stroke of this shape. So we're seeing it here in the preview. We're seeing the preview of the fill. But if I preview the output of the stroke, what we're going to see is a nice outline. So this is going to be the outline for our shape. And I think it's just a little bit too thick right now. So I'm going to change our stroke thickness to 0.08. And now we've got an outline that's just slightly thinner. You know, obviously you can set this to whatever value works for you. But for now, we're going to use this one. And so now what I need to do is combine this stroke value with this value that we've generated here for the inside of the progress bar. And I can do that just by taking the stroke and finding whichever value is greater. So I'm going to take the maximum of the stroke and the interior lerp value. So now you can see we've got our outline here, we've got our gray background, and here right on the edge, we've got the interior of the progress bar. And if I come over to my slider, you can see that it's sliding in the interior value just like that. And the last thing that we need to do is mask out the outside of the progress bar, because this part here that's outside of our outline is not supposed to be visible. And this is pretty easy to do. All I need to do is take our fill output here and multiply it by what we've got here. So I'll just take my fill and add a multiply node and wire this into that. And now we've got a progress bar. So let's take a look. I'm going to grab my slider value here, and we can move the slider value. And as we move it, you can see that the progress bar is filling up. So if we're doing like some kind of loading screen, and the loading starts and it's making progress and it's filling up, and now it's done. Cool. So all we need to do now is bring in the parameters that we created at the beginning. So here's our progress value. And instead of this nice interactive slider that we've been using to preview our results, I'm going to plug in our progress value so that we can connect up this value as a parameter from outside. I'll just delete my slider there, and instead we're going to use that progress parameter. And then the other thing that we need to do is bring in our width height value. And this is the value that we're going to use to allow the user to adjust the aspect ratio. So I can plug my width height value in there, and I can also plug it in up here with my outline for the progress bar. Okay, and I'm all set. That is our shader. And I hope you can see how easy it was for us to create this because we had these nodes already created in our subgraph library. As I said before, I've linked all of those subgraphs down in the description. And as you follow along throughout the series, we're going to be creating more of these nodes so that you can use them to very easily put together effects like this. I guess there is one last thing that we need to do, and that is we need to take our output here and plug it into our out. So let's plug this into our out vector there, and we'll just call this color. And we also need to make an alpha channel, and so I'm going to add a new float input here, and we'll call that alpha. And for the alpha, we can just grab the fill shape that we're passing out here and pass that out as our alpha. So now we've got a subgraph that we can use, and we can add this in to a bigger graph if we want to, so that we could create a full UI with one shader and include a progress bar as part of it. That's why we started out creating a subgraph instead of creating a shader. Okay, now that we've got our progress bar done, let's go ahead and switch over to Unreal, and I'll show you how to do the same thing in that engine. All right, here we are in Unreal. Let's go ahead and start by opening our content drawer. Come here to our shaders folder, and we're going to create a brand new material function for our progress bar. We're going to make a progress bar just like we did in Unity. I'm going to call this gradient bar, and we'll open up our material function here and get started. Okay, the first thing that we need to do is create our rectangle. So we'll bring in our rectangle SDF node that we've created previously. And I'm going to go ahead and plug our fill into the output result just so that we can see what this looks like. And so here's our rectangle, and we want to actually create a pill shape. So in order to do that, I'm going to first create a vector2 value, and I'm going to set our width to 0.9 and our height to 0.8. And we're going to plug this into our size value here. So now we've got just a little bit bigger rectangle. And now we need to set these corner radii value, and we're going to set those to be the same as our height value here. So there's our corner radii. And now since we've plugged our height value into our corner radii, now we're getting a nice pill shape. Okay, so we're going to need to animate this pill shape so that it slides in from the left. And to create animation, we need to add our move node. So I'm going to add a move, and we're going to plug the UVs coming out of the move into the UV there of our rectangle shape. Now obviously it's not moving yet because we don't have any values plugged into our move. And so I'm going to go ahead and create another vector2, and we don't want it to move up and down. We just want it to move left and right. And so I'm going to grab the values coming out of there, plug them into the move. Actually, I don't need a vector 2. I need to use an append vector node. And we want the up and down value, which is B, to be 0. So I'm going to plug 0 into that. But then we want to be able to control the movement here. So I'm going to create an input parameter for that. Function input. And we're going to set its type to be a scalar. And we'll call this progress. And we'll set a default value for progress to 0.75. And so now I can just plug that into A. And B is going to be 0. And now we can plug that into the move amount. And so now you can see that my circle is over here off the screen. And let's see what happens if we change the value of progress. So here we've got it at 0.75. We'll set it to 0, and it's right in the middle, 0.2. And it's kind of sliding off to the left, 0.4, 0.7, or 6. So as this value gets higher, our shape slides off to the left. So if we get a 0.5, it's going further over to the left, 0.7, and it's going out of the screen to the left. And we actually want it to do the opposite. And so what I'm going to do here is just add a 1 minus node, and that's going to invert the value so that instead of going out as our value gets higher, it's going to come in as our value gets higher. So we start out with 0, it's off the screen. And as we type in higher values now, it's going to come in. And the last thing that we want to do is add a remap here to give ourselves just a little bit of space, because we're going to have a border around our progress bar, and we want this progress mask that's coming in from the left to start at the edge of the border instead of starting off of the screen. And so in order to do that, I'm going to add a remap node, remap value range, and I'm going to bring in my input here and plug that into the input. And my input low is going to be 0, and my input high is going to be 1. But then I want to remap it, so instead of going from 0 to 1, it's going to start out at 0.1 and go to 1. So that's going to remap my value, and so now instead of going all the way off the screen, if my input value is 0, our mask is going to be hovering at the edge. And that gives me just a little bit of space here on the edge of the screen to create a border around my progress bar. All right, let's go ahead and set this to a default value of 0.75 just so we can see this mask. And now I'm going to consolidate my nodes here just a little bit. And the next thing that we're going to do is colorize this mask that we've created that can slide in from the left. So in order to add color to our mask, we need to create a gradient. And previously we created a gradient node, so I'll bring in that. And we called it sample gradient. And this node's kind of crazy, so bear with me for a minute here. So what this is going to allow me to do is to create a whole bunch of different colors and then determine where on the gradient those colors are going to appear. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to start out with a black color, and I'm going to plug that into color 1. And then for my next color, we're going to make this kind of a purpley color. Something kind of like that. And I'll plug that into color 2. And then for my next color, I'm going to use kind of a pink like that. We'll plug that into color 3. Then I want kind of an orangey color for my next one. Here we go. We'll plug that into color 4. And then for my last one, We're going to use kind of a yellowy color. There we go. So I'll plug that into color 5. So now you can see I've got this gradient that goes from black, purple, pink, orange, and yellow. And now I need to input a gradient here. I also need to determine the position of each of these colors. So my position 1 is going to be 0. My position 2 is going to be 0.25. My position 3 is going to be 0.5. My position 4 is going to be 0.75. And then my position 5 is going to be 1. So now I've determined the location along the gradient of each of the colors. So this is going to be 0, 0.25, 0.5, 0.75, and 1. And so now I just need to pass in a gradient mask here that controls where all of these values come. And in order to do that, I'm just going to create a linear gradient node, and I can just plug in the U coordinate of my linear gradient node into my gradient mask. And now if I plug this into my output, we should get a really nice looking gradient. And you might notice that there's some really weird stuff going on over here on the right side of the gradient, and I can fix that just by using my my one input value here and just connecting it up to the other values that we're not using. Now ideally you'd probably want to edit this sample gradient node. Right now we're only using 5 colors, and this allows up to 8. So if you were to create a sample gradient node that only used 5 colors, you could go in and edit this and create a 5-color version and remove these extra color 6, 7, and 8 and position 6, 7, and 8 so that it wasn't doing the extra math. But we're just going to leave it like this for now. Okay, so now what we need to do is take our gradient and colorize our rectangle mask here. So in order to do that, I'm going to add a linear interpolate node, and we're going to blend between a value of 0.2 and the colors in our gradient based on the mask that we're creating with our rectangle SDF node. So now that we've created that lerp, I can wire that into our output. And now you can see I've got our mask here, our progress mask, and it's colored by that gradient that we just created. So as I slide my progress, if I set this to 0, as I increase this value, it's going to take on the colors of the gradient that we created up there. So we have our mask that's kind of like the interior of our progress bar. The next thing that we need to do is create the outside and the mask that creates the edge or the border of the progress bar. So in order to do that, I can just take our rectangle node that we've already created, and I'm going to copy and paste it, and we're going to put it up here. And for the width, instead of 0.9, I'm going to set it to 0.91, just to make it slightly wider than the interior that we've already created. So coming out of this version of our rectangle, I actually have a border mask, and I also have an outside border. So we have our fill shape, and we also have our stroke shape. Now, remember that the stroke shape here looks like this. So it's actually an outline of our progress bar, and that's what we're going to use it for. But we need to change the thickness. It's just a little bit too thick. So I'm going to add another parameter here, and right here for stroke thickness, I'm going to set that value, instead of, right now it defaults to 0.1, and I'm going to set it to 0.08, just to make it just slightly thinner. Obviously you can set this to whatever you like. So I'm going to set this to 0.08. If I set it to 0.01, obviously it's going to be really thin, but what I want is 0.08. Okay, so now I can blend between this border and my progress color here using a maximum node. So I'm going to add a max and plug this in. And so now we actually get a really interesting result. Our value coming out of stroke is a black and white value, or a float. And our value coming out of our lerp here is a color value. And when I pass both of those into a max, it's actually turning our color black and white. And we don't want that. And the way that we can fix that is by adding an append many node here. And instead of this black and white value, we can plug this stroke value into the RG and B of our append many. And now the RG and B coming out, plug it into our max. And so we've just converted this stroke value into an RGB color that has the same value in each channel. So now when we plug this into max, we're actually getting the maximum between our gradient color coming out of here and our mask value coming out of here. So now you can see we've got our combination of our progress bar outline and our interior fill value. But we have some values out here that we don't want, so we need to mask those out. And we can do that with this fill output here. So all we need to do is take this fill output and multiply it by the value that we've already calculated here. So we'll just take our max and plug that into our multiply and plug that into our output result. And that will mask out the outsides of our progress bar. So all we see is the outline and the interior. And now we've got a progress bar that's all ready to go. I'm just going to do a couple of little things to clean up here. Instead of calling this result, I like names that are a little bit shorter, so I'm just going to call this out. Actually, we want to call this color because we're going to make a new one. We're going to create a function output here that is the fill coming out of our rectangle. We can just use that as our alpha value. And instead of result, we're going to call this alpha. So now we have the color values and the alpha values output for our material function. And we can use this outside and make it transparent so that you can see other things behind our progress bar if you want to. Okay, I think we're just about done. The one last thing that I want to do is add another input here. And we're going to call this one width and height. And this is what we can use to control the aspect ratio. This is going to be a vector 2. And we'll set the default values to 1 and 1. And we're going to plug our width and height into our rectangle here. And we're also going to plug it into our rectangle up here. And what this will allow us to do is right now this object that our shader is applied to is a square. But if we apply it to something long and thin, we can set the width and height values of this input parameter here to accommodate that. And that way our rounded corners will look really nice and the aspect ratio will be correct regardless of how long and thin or tall and stretched the object is that our shader is applied to. Okay, and then we want our progress bar to be a sort priority of 0. We want our width and height to be a sort priority of 1. And for our outputs, we want our color to be a sort priority of 0 and our alpha to be a sort priority of 1. Okay, and now we have a really nice gradient progress bar. It looks beautiful and you can apply it to all sorts of different shapes of UI elements and it will adapt correctly as long as you pass in the proper width and height values. So I hope you enjoyed our tutorial today. We made a cool looking progress bar. Next week, I think we're going to make another progress bar as well, but this time we're going to make one that goes around a circular dial. So I hope you tune in for that. It's going to be a good one. And in the meantime, have a great week, everybody.